Okay, listener name. You've really gone deep down the GPT-4 rabbit hole, haven't you? A whole stack of articles, huh? And even that monster of a technical report. Sounds like you're really trying to separate, like the hype from the reality. And honestly, who can blame you? So buckle up because today's deep dive is all about GPT-4. We're going to get to the really interesting stuff, the juicy bits. Don't worry, we're not going to turn you into a machine learning whiz overnight or anything.
What I find really fascinating about GPT-4 is that it doesn't feel like, just another step forward. You know what I mean? It really feels like maybe a total paradigm shift. I mean, we've gone from these language models that could barely string a coherent paragraph together to something that can pass the bar exam. And not just pass it, but score in the 90th percentile. Think about that. This thing could be outscoring most law graduates.
Okay, now you're just giving me flashbacks to my LSAT prep.
Okay.
But yeah, I totally see what you mean. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's go back to that source material you sent, that GPT-4 technical report. I got to be honest, I'm pretty sure I sprouted a couple new brain wrinkles just trying to wrap my head around the whole thing.
Yeah, it's dense to say the least, but it really is packed with some incredible insights. I mean, at its core, GPT-4 is this massive, and I mean truly massive, language model that was trained on this just ridiculous amount of data. And we're not just talking about text anymore either. This thing processes images too, which is a huge step forward. But here's where it gets really wild. OpenAI, the folks behind GPT-4, they were actually able to predict how capable GPT-4 would be before they even finished training it.
Wait, hold on, back up a sec. It can predict its own abilities? That sounds like something straight out of I don't know, the Terminator or something.
Yeah. It's called predictable scaling, and it's one of the things that makes GPT-4 so groundbreaking. So they basically trained these smaller versions of GPT-4 on a tiny fraction of the data. I think it was something like 1/10,000th. And by looking at how these mini-me GPT-4s performed, they could extrapolate, right, and kind of predict the capabilities of the full-blown GPT-4. It's sort of I don't know, if you saw a baby with ridiculously large baby feet, you could predict they were going to be really tall.
Okay, I'm with you. But why is this predictable scaling thing such a big deal?
Because it has huge implications for safety and control. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper, right? But you have no idea how strong the foundation needs to be. That wouldn't be very safe, would it? This predictable scaling thing, it allows the researchers to kind of anticipate potential problems, right? And then put safety measures in place early on, before the AI becomes too powerful to control.
So it's kind of like putting those safety protocols in place while the AI is still in its training wheels phase, right?
Exactly. And speaking of safety, OpenAI actually took some pretty fascinating steps to make sure that GPT-4 doesn't turn into some kind of digital Frankenstein's monster. They brought in over 50 experts in all sorts of fields, AI ethics, you've got your cybersecurity gurus, even people who think about those long-term risks, what happens if the AI goes rogue and tries to take over the world, that kind of thing. And they basically told all these experts to try and make GPT-4 misbehave.
So they basically told them to intentionally try and make it go bad. That's kind of like AI tough love, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They're basically playing digital devil's advocate, right? Just poking and prodding, trying to find any weaknesses that could be exploited. Those ethical hackers. It's kind of like that. But instead of hacking into a website, they're trying to hack an AI.
Okay, well, that does make me feel a little bit better knowing that they're, actually thinking about that kind of stuff. But before we go full-blown Terminator scenario here, let's talk about what GPT-4 can actually do. I mean, the report goes on and on about how it aced all those standardized tests.
Yeah.
We're talking the bar exam, the LSAT, even the SAT. And get this, it's not just passing these tests, it's acing them, scoring in the top percentiles. And it's not just language anymore either. This thing is solving some pretty high-level math problems that would make my head spin.
Right. And that actually brings up a really interesting question, which is, what does it even mean for a language model to, understand math? Are those the same cognitive processes that we're using, or is it something else entirely?
Right. Is it really thinking, or is it just really, really good at recognizing patterns and then spitting out the right answer?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? And it gets even more mind-blowing when you consider that GPT-4 can now process images too, right? So it's not just reading text, it's actually looking at visual information, connecting it to the text and drawing conclusions based on that.
Wait, so you're telling me that it can look at a picture and tell me what's happening, but also understand the context, maybe even the emotions, or even the deeper meaning behind it?
The report is a little vague on the specifics of how exactly the image processing works, but the fact that it's performing well on academic benchmarks suggests that it's not just recognizing, like, basic objects. It seems like it's understanding them in a much deeper way. I mean, imagine feeding it something like, I don't know, medical scans or architectural blueprints, stuff that we currently use highly trained experts to interpret.
Okay, that's both amazing and a little creepy at the same time. But we've established that GPT-4 is, well, impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not perfect, right? You mentioned earlier it still has limitations.
Oh, absolutely. No AI is perfect. One of the big ones they highlight in the report is that it can still hallucinate.
Hallucinate?
Yeah.
Like see things that aren't really there?
Well, not literally. It basically means that it can still just make stuff up. Like it will confidently present something as a fact, even when it's completely wrong. It's kind of like, if I asked it, what's the capital of Australia? And it confidently responded with Sydney, when of course it's actually Canberra.
Ah, so it's still learning. He's still prone to those, oops, my bad moments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's better to think of it less like a finished product and more like, imagine like a ridiculously talented but still developing prodigy. It has incredible potential, but we still need to be cautious, right? Use critical thinking and not just blindly accept everything it tells us as gospel.
Gotcha. Fact check the AI. Just like you would with any other source. Speaking of making sure that, GPT-4 stays on the straight and narrow, the report mentions this model-assisted safety pipeline they used, which honestly just sounds like something straight out of like a sci-fi thriller. Can you break that down for us? What is that?
It sounds incredibly complicated, but it's actually a pretty simple idea at its core. Essentially, they're using GPT-4 to help police itself, to recognize when it starts to stray into dangerous territory.
Hold on. So they're using AI to make AI safer. Isn't that a little bit like, I don't know, putting a robot in charge of babysitting itself?
It sounds a little counterintuitive, I know, but it actually makes a lot of sense. So basically, they trained GPT-4 on this massive data set of text and code, and they were specifically looking for patterns, like red flags that could lead to unsafe outputs. It's kind of like, how you teach a kid about stranger danger, right?
So they're basically teaching it to recognize those, warning signs, those red flags. Mm-hmm. The hate speech, the calls for violence, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And it's not just about catching the really obvious stuff. They also wanted to make sure that GPT-4 wouldn't, give out instructions for building a bomb or something, or synthesizing harmful chemicals.
Okay, well, that is definitely reassuring. But even with all that, they still had those human experts, right?
Yeah.
Just in case the AI missed something.
Absolutely. Think of it like a safety net. The AI does a lot of the heavy lifting. But you still want a human expert double-checking its work, especially when it comes to those really high-stakes areas. They want to make sure that even if someone's deliberately trying to use GPT-4 for, evil purposes, they want to make that as difficult as possible.
So it's kind of like a combination of AI and human oversight to try and keep everything in check. Which actually, now that I say that out loud, kind of makes me think about all those sci-fi movies where the AI, outsmarts its creators and decides to take over the world. Do you think that's a realistic concern with something like GPT-4?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a topic that sparks a lot of debate, right? And speculation. Some experts will tell you that we're still a long way off from AI that can truly, outsmart humans in like a general sense. But then you have others who will argue that the pace of development is moving so rapidly that, we need to be prepared for anything.
So the jury's still out on that one, I guess. But it sounds like we've done a pretty deep dive into the technical inner workings of GPT-4, right?
Yeah.
But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten into how it stacks up against other language models or what this all means for, us as a society.
Oh, absolutely. We've only just begun to scratch the surface here. There are so many more fascinating angles to explore, and we've got this whole stack of your articles here to dive into. What stands out to you from those articles? Maybe we can dive into a specific application or a particular concern that you found interesting.
One of these articles you sent, it was talking about how GPT-4 is being used to create new music, and not just any music, but music in the style of classical composers.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a brand new Mozart symphony, but composed by an AI.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's really incredible when you think about it. It's not just processing information. It's actually generating new creative content. And it's actually good.
I know, right? That article I was talking about, it was saying how some of the AI-generated music, it actually fooled classical music experts. Like they couldn't tell the difference between, what a human had composed and what the AI had like spat out.
It really makes you question, like, what does creativity even mean anymore? Like, if a machine can create art that's indistinguishable from human art, then where does that leave us?
It's a total mind bender, that's for sure. But, kind of going back to something you were saying earlier about GPT-4 being like this paradigm shift. What did you mean by that?
Well, for the longest time, AI research, it was kind of like stuck in these labs and universities. This is fascinating, but also kind of abstract thing. You know what I mean? It didn't have a lot of real world applications. But then GPT-4 comes along and really just large language models in general, and they've basically blown the doors wide open.
So it's not just an improvement, it's like a fundamental change in what's even possible with AI.
Exactly. I like to use the analogy of like the horse-drawn carriage, right? And then boom, the automobile comes along. And it's not just like a faster horse-drawn carriage, it's a totally different thing, and it totally revolutionizes transportation, right? Like it reshapes our cities.
Yeah.
And I think GPT-4 and these large language models, they have the potential to do the same thing to entire industries. I mean, we're talking everything from education and healthcare to like entertainment and even customer service.
Speaking of customer service, I feel like I've definitely noticed more and more companies using like those AI chatbots.
Yeah.
Is that something that GPT-4 would be powering?
It's certainly possible. OpenAI is being a little tight-lipped about exactly which companies are using GPT-4. They don't want to give away all their secrets. But its ability to, like understand natural language and actually generate like human-sounding text, it makes it a really good fit for that kind of application. Imagine like calling up customer service and instead of getting stuck in like, an endless phone tree, you actually get to talk to an AI that can actually understand your problem, like respond in a helpful and empathetic way, maybe even like crack a joke to lighten mood a little. Who wouldn't want that, right?
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Okay, but on a more, I guess, a more serious note, we've talked about some of the potential benefits. There got to be some downsides too, right? It can't all be, sunshine and roses.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. And I think one of the biggest concerns that people have, and it's a valid concern, is the potential for misuse, right? I mean, this is a really powerful tool. And like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for, well, imagine this technology falling into the wrong hands.
Like, I don't know, that someone using it to create like those super realistic looking fake news articles or deep fakes that could like really erode public trust.
Exactly. Or even something that seems like relatively harmless on the surface, like, a student using it to write their term papers. It really calls into question like this idea of authenticity, right? Like what does authorship even mean in a world where AI can write just as well as a human?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like every potential benefit comes with like, a potential risk attached.
It's true. It's kind of like the double-edged sword of, of any powerful technology. And I think the key here is that we need to be having these open and honest conversations about the potential risks, right? We need to be developing safeguards and ethical guidelines to make sure that this technology is being used responsibly.
It sounds like we might need a whole other deep dive just to unpack all those, those ethical and societal implications. But before we go down that road, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned before. You were talking about how GPT-4 was tested in like all these different languages, right?
Yeah.
And I think the report, I kind of skimmed over it, but it mentioned something about like performance differences or something. And I'm really curious about that.
Oh, yeah. That's actually something that I think gets overlooked a lot. When GPT-4 first came out, there was all this buzz about its English language capabilities, right? And rightfully so. I mean, it's really impressive. But what a lot of people don't realize is that OpenAI actually went to great lengths to test GPT-4 in a whole bunch of different languages. And what they found is actually pretty interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Spill the tea. What did they find?
Well, it turns out that GPT-4's performance can actually vary quite a bit depending on, like what language you're using. So, for example, it tends to do really well in languages that are like structurally similar to English. So like, French or Spanish.
Ah, so it's like learning a new romance language. If you already speak one, it becomes a little easier.
Exactly. But when it comes to languages that are like really different from English, I'm talking like, Mandarin Chinese or Arabic, it can be a little hit or miss. It kind of struggles a bit.
Interesting. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of it is just like the sheer amount of data that's available in each language. Remember how we were talking about how GPT-4 is trained on this massive data set of text and code?
Yeah.
Well, the reality is that there's just way more digital text available in English than there is in a lot of other languages.
Makes sense. It's like trying to learn a new language from a dictionary that's only got a few pages, right? You're not really going to get very far.
That's a great way to put it. But it's not just about the, the quantity of the data. It's also about the quality and the diversity. Because, I mean, languages are complex. They have different nuances, different cultural contexts, different ways of expressing ideas.
So even if GPT-4 has access to a lot of data in let's say, I don't know, Swahili, right? It might still have trouble really understanding those subtleties if the data that it's been fed isn't rich and diverse enough.
Exactly. And that's something that OpenAI, they acknowledge this in their report. Like, they're actively working on ways to improve GPT-4's performance across a wider range of languages. But it really just goes to show just how challenging it is to build AI that can truly, understand and generate human language in all its complexity and diversity.
It's a good reminder that even with, all its bells and whistles, right, GPT-4 is still a work in progress.
Yeah.
It's not going to magically erase, language barriers overnight.
It's true. But it does give us a glimpse, right, into a future where maybe, just maybe, communication could be more seamless, more accessible across cultures and across languages, which I think we can all agree would be a pretty amazing thing.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about GPT-4's language capabilities, its creative potential. We even dipped our toes into some of the ethical, murky waters there. But I'm curious, from your perspective as an expert in this field, what are you most excited about when it comes to the future of this technology?
Oh, that's a great question. And to be honest, it's really hard to pick just one thing. But if I had to choose, I'd say I'm most excited about the potential for GPT-4 and really just AI in general to accelerate scientific discovery, I think it has the potential to help us solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
Okay, now you're talking big picture stuff. Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine using GPT-4 to analyze these massive data sets of, climate data. It could help us identify patterns and trends that we as humans, we might just miss. And then using those insights, maybe we can develop more accurate climate models, right? Models that can help us predict and hopefully mitigate the really scary effects of climate change.
So it's like having this superpowered research assistant, right? That can crunch numbers and connect the dots in a way that would take, human scientists years, if not decades, to do on their own.
Exactly. And it's not just climate change, right? We're talking about developing new medical treatments, designing more sustainable cities, even exploring the vastness of space. I think the possibilities are pretty much limitless.
It sounds like you're cautiously optimistic about the future.
I am. I think it's important that we proceed with caution.
Right.
We have to address these ethical concerns head on, but I really do believe that the potential benefits here, they're just too great to ignore.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of potential benefits, we've still got a whole stack of articles here that are just bursting with ideas about how GPT-4 could be used in in education, in healthcare, even in art and entertainment. So let's dive into some of those next. What do you say?
Okay, listener name. We've gone over a lot. I mean, we've really dug into how GPT-4 works, what it can do, all that stuff. But out of all these articles you sent, there's one thing that I know a lot of people are, kind of scared about. And that's, jobs.
It's the big question, isn't it? Is this it? Is AI going to replace us all, make all our skills totally useless?
Yeah, especially with everything we just talked about. It can write code, pass all those tests, even write poems and stuff. It really does feel no job is safe from the robots, right? It's interesting to look back at history for a second. Every time there's been a really big technological shift, people always freak out that, the machines are coming for our jobs. But what usually happens isn't that jobs just disappear. It's more they change, right? Think about it. When we switched from agriculture to manufacturing, or when we all stopped using typewriters and got computers, big changes, sure, but we adapted, right?
So instead of thinking, robots are taking our jobs, maybe we should be thinking about how our jobs might change.
Exactly. And that's where things get, I think, really interesting. Take lawyers, for example. GPT-4 can already do a lot of the stuff that lawyers used to have to spend hours and hours doing, analyzing legal documents, finding precedents. It can even draft basic contracts.
So are lawyers out of a job then?
Not necessarily. I mean, what it means is that lawyers can now, like, offload some of those really tedious tasks to AI, which then frees them up, right, to focus on the stuff that AI, at least for now, isn't very good at, like strategy or that really high-level creative thinking. And of course, like the human touch, actually interacting with clients. It's hard to replace that, that human connection.
So it's not about like replacement. It's more about like augmentation. So instead of a lawyer having to like lock themselves in a room for a week to go through a mountain of case files, they can have GPT-4 like do that initial analysis, and then they can come in and use their expertise to figure out, the best way to win the case.
Exactly. And this isn't just some like pie in the sky thinking. This is already happening. And it's not just in those like, fancy white collar jobs either. Think about healthcare. Imagine GPT-4 could be analyzing medical images, maybe even helping to diagnose patients. It could personalize treatment plans, but it wouldn't replace doctors, right? It would just give them more time and better tools so they could provide even better care.
It'd be like having like the most efficient assistant ever.
Right.
One that never gets tired, never makes mistakes.
Right. And of course, it's not like all our problems are just going to magically disappear. We're going to have to figure out how to, retrain people for these new jobs and make sure everyone has access to the education and training they need. But I'm actually really optimistic. I think that this has the potential to make things better for everyone.
So it's not about being afraid of the robots. It's more about, figuring out how can we work together, right? How can we use these tools to like level up our own skills and abilities?
Exactly.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit here. I know you're really interested in like, the bigger philosophical side of AI. And I got to say, after reading some of these articles, I can see why. There was this one that mentioned GPT-4, like passing the Turing test. That test that's supposed to tell you if a machine is like actually intelligent.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, if we can't tell the difference between, a machine and a human, what does that even mean? Does that mean the machine is actually thinking? Does it have feelings? Or is it just really, really good at faking it?
Yeah. And like, is there even a difference at that point, right?
Yeah. It's a question without an easy answer. But for me, I always go back to that idea of, just because a machine can like talk the talk, right, doesn't mean it can actually walk the walk. Like emotionally speaking.
Right. Like it might be able to write a really convincing love poem, but does it actually like feel love? Who knows?
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important that we approach all of this whole AI thing, with a healthy dose of humility. We have to think about the consequences of what we're building, not just for us, but for, for future generations.
Oh, but it's a lot more than just building smarter machines. It's about like using those machines to help us understand, ourselves better. Understand the universe, even.
Now you're getting it. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, on that note, I think we're about out of time. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of GPT-4. It's been fascinating.
The pleasure was all mine. Always happy to nerd out about AI.
And listener name. Hopefully this has given you plenty to, to think about, to mull over, maybe keep you up at night. Just kidding. But seriously, we've only just scratched the surface here, right? There's so much more to explore, and I encourage you to do exactly that.
Yeah, don't just take our word for it. Get out there and stay curious. Keep asking those big, tough questions. That's how we learn and grow, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If a machine can write poetry, create art, even pass the bar exam, what does that say about us? About what it means to be human? Until next time, happy diving.